Well, welcome everyone. My name is Ben Ropp. I'm with Wichita Public Library, and this is a class on Excel Part 3, Formulas and Functions. And I'm being assisted by Ken Warner, who's there. And if you have any questions throughout the class, please just post those in the chat. And if I don't see them, then Ken will bring those to my attention as he's able. So today we'll look at those cursors to look out for, and then we're going to talk about formulas, and which is just a math equation, and we'll do a brief math review on the order of operations. And then we're going to talk about some what a function is, and we're going to do some practice with those formulas and functions, and then we're going to jump into a spreadsheet here about ice cream sales, which will let us do some practice with the formulas and functions, and also talk about the difference between relative and absolute references in functions. So to begin, we'll do some quick review of the interface on Microsoft Excel, which is very similar to other Microsoft Office programs, where we have the ribbon across the top here, and will mostly be on the Home tab, which has most of the basic features and commands. The font group in the clipboard being the most probably familiar and most common if you've used Microsoft Word. Then we're gonna take a look at the Formulas tab a little bit here. We won't really be using it directly, but this insert function command here will let you look up a function and learn about what it does, and also get the structure of that function. That's very useful. There's also, you can see all the different categories of functions that are here. Let's see, if we open that up, you can see those a little better. And there's some other tools for working with functions there. There's hundreds, probably thousands of functions that Excel can do. A lot of really some complicated things, as well as a lot of other things. And then just some basic nomenclature. We have our rows with numbers and our columns with letters. And a cell is the unique intersection of a column and a row. So this active cell with the green border is B3, and you see that's listed here in the name box. And that in the B3 is that cell address. And we will be using cell addresses in formulas to tell Excel what we want it to do. And this also here we'll be using, this is called the formula bar, where you can edit what is in the cell. And if there's a formula, it's going to display the formula in the formula bar, whereas in the cell itself, it's going to show the product of that formula or function. And then some other nomenclature. We have the file that we're working with is called a workbook. And every workbook is made up of one or more worksheets. And the worksheet is a single page within the workbook. And you can switch between worksheets by clicking the tabs here in the lower left corner across the bottom. If there's more tabs, they would continue over here, and there's a plus sign to add a new sheet. So that's some basic nomenclature to keep in mind. So we have here a practice page here. And then, so for this, in the column A, in A7, we're going to compose a simple formula, which is like a math equation. Let me jump over to, we have some cursors to look out for. Again, to review, the fat plus sign is the selection cursor. If I click and drag with that, it lets me select a row or a column or any group of cells. And then we have the autofill cursor, which is, if you remember, is what we see when we position the cursor over the little square in the corner of the active cell. It becomes the autofill cursor. And if we drag that, it will autofill into the other cells we drag into, whatever's in that first one. And we'll be using that a little bit. And that's the main ones we'll be talking about today. So with a basic formula, we're always going to start with the equal sign. So if you remember basic algebra, we have 1 + 2 = x. If we flip that around, it means the same thing. We have x = 1 + 2. Now the x in Excel is the cell, the active cell that you're in. So in this case, we're in A7. You can see that listed here. Let me move back to the Home tab there. So this cell equals the math that we want it to do, 1 + 2, for instance. But in this example, we're going to actually say we want to add these cells that are above A7. We're going to say we're not going to say 1 + 2 + 3 + 4 + 5. We're going to say A2 + A3, etc. So that if we change these numbers, they'll automatically update. So what do we start with always? And this applies to functions as well as formulas. We always start with the equal sign. So here I've got the equal sign. I'm in A7. And instead of typing out the cell address, which you can do, but typing always leads to typos in my experience sooner or later. So, and especially when you're starting out, to avoid mistakes, it's good if you can just, after you've typed that equal sign, you can click on the cell and Excel will put the cell address of that cell into the formula. So I've got equals A2 because I clicked on A2, and I'm going to type a plus sign. Now I'm going to click on A3, and Excel inserts that cell address there, A3. I type a plus sign again, click A4, type plus, click A5, type plus, click A6. And you may notice that Excel, in addition to inserting the cell addresses of the ones that I clicked on, it's color coded them. So A2 is blue, A3 is red, A4 purple, A5 green, A6 is sort of violet. And so it doesn't save that value until I either move to another cell or hit enter. I can hit enter or tab, or I can use an arrow sign. Any of these will save that value. Actually, the arrows will change that cell selection. But if I hit enter, I now have the result of that formula. And if I click back on A7, you can see in the formula bar up here that it's got the formula that I told it to do by typing and clicking on cells, and it gives me the result in the cell itself. So 15 is the sum of all of these numbers. And to double check that it's working right, we can change one of these numbers. Let's put 15 in A3 and hit enter. Now you notice that the value in A7 automatically updated. So if I change that back to 2, keep an eye on A7 here. I type 2, hit enter, and A7 updates again, and now it's 15 again. So that is a basic formula. And before we get into the order of operations, I'm going to do a simple function, which is Autosum. And Autosum has its own button on the ribbon here. So this time we're gonna add up the same numbers, but in different cells here, starting in B7. And I'm going to, let me extend this out here so we can see it a little better. There's Autosum. Now, as with a lot of buttons on the ribbon, you may notice there's some of them that are actually 2 buttons, like insert has an insert button, and then it has a drop-down arrow. And Autosum is the same way. There's the Autosum button that has this Autosum symbol. It's like a capital E. It's actually a Greek letter epsilon, which stands for sum in mathematics. And there's also a drop-down button. And right now, and that lets you access some other common functions. I'm just going to click on the Autosum button, and you'll notice that it's inserted the sum function, and it's already selected the cells that I want to add. And it's actually just guessed which cells I want to add. In this case, it guessed correctly. I'm just going to hit enter, and you see we have the same result as in the A7 and B7. So A7, if you look at the formula, it's added A2 through A6 in a spelled out formula. In B7, we have the sum function, which starts with the equals as always, and then it has this function name, which is sum, and then it has parentheses. And inside the parentheses, we have a range designated by B2 colon B6. And it's adding up all of the numbers in that range. So if I click on that or double click down here, you'll see it that uses the same color coding method where it's highlighted B2 to B6 in blue and demonstrating the nomenclature for a range, which is using a colon in between the cell addresses. So one thing, so I want to demonstrate something else about the sum function. If I click, I'm going to just add something down here in B9. The way that Excel guessed which cells I was wanting to add in here is it just looked to the adjacent cells, either above or to the left. Most commonly, we use the sum function at the bottom of a column of numbers. And so the first place Excel guesses that I'm adding numbers is adjacently directly above in the cells above. So if I come down here and click the Autosum function, it just jumped on the single nearest cell, which is up here. And notice that it's highlighted. So it's highlighted B7 and it's in blue. But if it guesses incorrectly, I can highlight another group of cells and it automatically inserts that range into my formula. And notice down below where it says sum, it has this little pop-up sort of box where it has sum and it has the parentheses and it says number 1, comma, and then it has number 2 in brackets and then a comma and then a dot, dot, dot. So what that little box is telling you is telling you what is the structure of the sum function. So as we'll learn, all functions have the same structure. And then except for what goes inside of the parentheses. That varies from function to function, but you'll find, and let's go back to this PowerPoint, all functions have the same structure. We have an equal sign, just like every function and formula starts with an equal sign. That tells Excel that we're doing some math or some function. And then you have the name of the function, and then you have parentheses. And then there may or may not be something inside of the parentheses. And those are inputs, or what they call arguments. In the structure of the sum function, you can have as many elements to add together as you want. They're just separated by commas. So I selected C2 to C6, and I'm going to type a comma, and then I'm going to select these over here. That's A2 to A6, and I'm going to type a comma, and then I'm going to click on B7. So, and you can see it's color coded them, so it gives me a nice visual representation of all of the elements that I'm adding together in this sum function. If I click enter, you'll see it gives me a number here, and up in the formula bar, it shows the function as I typed it in, or partly using my mouse, but and actually I just clicked on Autosum and then used my mouse and typed commas to create this function. So the sum function is very powerful this way. You can add anything you want, as many numbers and ranges all together. Of course, back on this one, we just did the range directly above the cell we're in. So I'm going to jump back to this PowerPoint and talk briefly about the order of operations. So, oh, my slide got a little mixed up, but if you have a complicated formula, so in C7, I'm going to just type a random formula, I'm going to say equals C2 times C3 minus C4 divided by C5 plus C6. So I've just varied all of the operators, that the four operators that the main ones that Excel uses that are familiar to us all. And the way that Excel will calculate this is using the order of operations. And that is, it starts with parentheses and then goes to exponents, which is things that are squared or cubed. 2 to the power of 2 is 4, 3 squared is 9, etc. And then it does multiplication and division. And lastly, it does addition and subtraction. And the mnemonic to remember this order of operations is, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So in this formula, we're going to, you go in the order that they come otherwise, but first you use the order of operations here. So I'm going to do multiplication and division before I do addition and subtraction. So it'll say C2 times C3 and C4 divided by C5 before it does this minus and this plus. So if I hit enter, it gives me an answer. And if I come up here, and let's say if I want it to do addition or subtraction before the multiplication or division, I need to add parentheses here. So I can say C2 times parentheses C3 minus C4, close parentheses, divided by parentheses C5 plus C6. Now the first answer was 6.25. You see, now we have a completely different answer, and that's because we just so if you're creating a formula, you need to remember the order of operations, and that is what Excel will use to calculate those things. The upshot of this is that if you want to make sure that it does things in the order that you want it to, use parentheses, because it will start with calculating things inside parentheses before it does anything else. So that was maybe more math than some of you wanted. But the good news is that we won't be doing so much algebra for the rest of it. But a couple of slides here can be useful to demonstrate the differences between formulas and functions. There's a simple addition formula, and we have an average formula. So we have 3 numbers. These are them added together. And then the average is them added together and then divided by 3 gives you the average. In a function, we can do the same thing. We have the sum function that's adding these numbers, and then we have the average function, which is taking these numbers and getting the average. So the sum function in this case is equivalent to this formula, A1 plus A2 plus A3, the average A1 to A3 is equivalent to parentheses A1 plus A2 plus A3, close parentheses, divided by 3. That's the formula to calculate the average of the three numbers A1 to A3. So the function is the shorthand, is the shortcut, if you will, to calculate complicated formulas. And so let's go back to, let's just move entirely over to the Excel sheet here. And so some of the other common functions, as I mentioned, are accessible on the Home tab here via the drop-down next to Autosum. So Autosum will create a sum for those. There is the sum of all of these random numbers. But if I click the drop-down number here, and then I can select average and click that, and you see it's made the same selection of that range directly above that cell, but this time it's used the average function. And you notice down here the average, the structure of the average function is equivalent to the sum function. I just hit enter. That gives us an average of these numbers. So remember, if there's any questions, just feel free to post those in the chat. A couple of the other common functions that are offered here is count numbers, and what that does, exactly what it says it does, which is count the numbers. Let's change this to the count numbers, and I want to demonstrate what this is doing exactly by altering one of the numbers here. So I'm going to hit enter. So it's the count of the numbers is simply how many entries in this range have numbers, and the answer is 5. And that's what we get. So now watch what happens if I take D3 and type 0 and hit enter. Notice the function, the result of the count function doesn't change. It still shows 5 numbers because 0 is a number. If I delete that value altogether, I'm just going to tap the delete button on D3 here. Type delete. Notice the count numbers changed. Now it counted 4 numbers because in D3 there is no entry at all. There's not a number, there's not a word. Let's see, if I type yes, notice it still doesn't change because yes is not a number. So if it finds text, it says, okay, that's not a number, I'm not going to count that. So I'm going to hit delete again. It still shows 4. If I type 0, it changes. I've got 5 numbers in this range. And lastly, I'll show, we're going to get into this, do this again in the next spreadsheet on this workbook. The last, well, there's a couple more, max and min, which, as you may guess, just return the maximum number or the highest number in the range, and minimum returns the lowest number in that range. And then there's also a more functions, which brings a pop-up box, which and I've already got the count function here. And you see it gives a description here. It says counts the number of cells in a range that contain numbers. So you don't have to guess at what a specific function does. You can look it up in the more functions option. Also in the formula tab on the ribbon, you can do insert function. I'm going to delete this function. I'm just going to click on D7 and type delete. And I click on insert function, and it gives me a search box. So I can type in count or select it from the list. This is the most common used functions, or the most recently used on this computer, on this login, and I can click on that function and it'll tell me what the function does, as well as giving me the structure of the format of inside the parentheses, what goes in there. And there's also a help on this function option, which brings up a pop-up here, which goes into more detail, and there's even a video. And it gives the syntax, or I've been referring to it as the format or the structure of the function. The syntax or the format tells you what goes inside the parentheses. Of course, the structure is the same on every function. You have the name, the parentheses, and the arguments or inputs inside the parentheses. And of course, they always start with the equals sign. So with that as an intro, let's dive into our ice cream sales spreadsheet, which is the next tab over on the worksheet here, on the workbook rather. This is the second spreadsheet in this workbook. It's called Ice Cream Sales. We have Jen and Barry's ice cream sales report. And so we have first, in these first 6 or so columns, we have a week number, 1 through 12. We have a start date. Now we're going to fill in values for these gray areas here. And so this is kind of a report or a log sheet for the sales of vanilla and chocolate for this quarter, or this 12-week period. And we have quantities of vanilla already listed. We have quantities of chocolate. So we're going to calculate the vanilla revenue for each week and also the chocolate revenue based on the vanilla quantity and the price of vanilla, and then the same for the chocolate. And we have the prices over here to the right. This area to the right we refer to as a dashboard. It's going to give us our overview of our table that's of our log of sales that's over on the left. So before we do that, we need to fill in the dates for 12 weeks following January 2019. I'm going to just change this to January 2022 by just typing 1/1 and hitting enter. Notice that when you enter 1/1 like that in a cell, and I've just typed it into the formula bar here, which also placed it in the active cell, which is B5 right now. It interprets that as a date, and it filled in the current year. That's what Excel does. Excel often will guess at what you're trying to do and will sort of make assumptions. And sometimes you have to correct it. A lot of the time it's correct and you just say thank you and move on. In this case, it was correct. I typed 1/1. I wasn't trying to do a division problem. If I was, I might have typed an equal sign at the beginning. And if I do that, it still gave me a date, which is interesting. So yeah, it doesn't always do what you want. But most of the time it's, a lot of the time it's correct. Anyway, not to get sidetracked, we want to create a formula to fill in the dates for the rest of this 12-week period, starting on January 1st. So first, let's try, well, we did the autofill before. If you remember, we can grab the autofill handle or the fill handle. When it changes to that small plus sign, notice it's very touchy. You have to get right over that little square. And there's just a tiny bit of wiggle room. And then if I click and drag, it's going to fill in a series. But the problem here is that these are supposed to be weeks, not days. And it's just added a day for each cell, for each row going down. So we want it to actually add 7 days for each cell going down. So I'm going to use my best friend, the undo button, which is up here. And you notice when I mouse over, it says, I'm up here in the top left, undo autofill, parentheses, Control Z. So the Control Z will also undo that, as well as just clicking that back arrow. So in B5, I'm going to set up a formula that will autofill down here. And that is, I'm going to, it's a simple formula. So what does it start with? It's going to start with equals. Always start with the equals. And then I'm going to click on B4 because I want to, that's the date that we're starting with. And then I want to add 7. I'm going to say plus 7. And this works because Excel treats dates and times as numbers. And that enables you to do simple formulas like this with dates. It treats, in dealing with dates, each day is an integer, or a 1 is valued at 1. So that date, January 7th plus 7, is going to be 7 days later, which is a week later. And that's what I want. So I'm going to hit enter, and you see it's filled in January 8th. And you can see in the formula bar, my formula B4 plus 7. Then I'm going to autofill that down. And that's going to fill in the dates, adding 7 days to each successive date to fill in the next date. The reason this works, and this is directly relevant to what we're about to do, the reason it works is because the reference here to B4 is a relative reference. In other words, if I copy this formula, it interprets it, it doesn't copy it as B4. In other words, each cell down here doesn't say B4 plus 7. It actually interprets it as take the cell directly above here and add 7. So that if I double click down here, it says it takes the previous cell and adds 7. So it's saying go up 1, add 7, and put that value here. That's a relative reference. Now, if there are cases when you don't want a relative reference, and we're about to see one of those cases right now. So now let's calculate our vanilla revenue, and then we'll do the same for the chocolate revenue. We have a quantity of each for each week. So in week 1, we've got the quantity, and we're going to multiply that by the price. So I'm going to type, as always, if I'm doing a formula or a function, start with equals. Now I'm going to take the quantity. So I click on the quantity for the first week, which is C4, type a multiply or times, which is the asterisk. And then I'm going to click on the price of vanilla, which is over here on I4. And I'm going to hit enter. Now, this is going to cause a problem, which you'll see as soon as I try to autofill this. Take a look at what happens. Something wonky happened. So look, the first two look like they worked okay, but then in D6, I've got an error that says value exclamation mark, and there's this little error button here, and it says, if I mouse over it, it says a value used in the formula is of the wrong data type. And so let's see what's going on with there. I'm going to double click on it, and you can see with the highlighting of color coding, it's multiplied the quantity of vanilla for that week by the word totals over here. So what's happening here? Let me click on another cell here, double click down here, you can see now it's multiplying the quantity of vanilla for that week by a blank cell over here. So the problem is simply that the left value here, the quantity of vanilla, was a relative reference, which is what we want. We want each week, each formula for the revenue to use the quantity of vanilla for that week. That's fine. But on the right side, we want to multiply that not by a relative reference down here, but we want that to be an absolute reference and stay up here at I4 to be the price of vanilla. So this, the way to fix it is there's a syntax or format that we can use to indicate to Excel that we want this to be an absolute reference. So the reference to I4, we want to be absolute. And the way that Excel does it is use the $sign in front of the column letter and the row number. So I just inserted, I have C4, which is a relative reference because I'm gonna have it change for each week. I want to multiply that by an absolute reference to I4, which is the price of vanilla over here. So I want that to stay the same even when we copy the formula down. And those $signs are what tell Excel to do that. So now I'm going to autofill this. And now it looks like it worked. So you notice the quantity of vanilla for the first 2 weeks is actually the same when before it was using the price for chocolate, and then it was using these blank cells and the word totals. So if I double click on one of these here, you can see it's remembered that I4 is the absolute reference staying up here even when I copy it down, whereas the quantity of vanilla number was a relative reference and changed as I moved the formula down the page. So it said, multiply the number to the left by I4, but use I4 every time. And that's the nomenclature that does it. The dollar signs in front of the column letter and the row number. So $I, $4 instead of I4. Okay. So now we just have to repeat that for the chocolate thing here. Are there any questions? Are people following? I'll mention briefly that this is a lesson plan created by the Denver Public Library, and they've done a really nice job. I think this really demonstrates the difference between an absolute and a relative reference well by this sort of horizontal structure and having this value over here that gets copied down and you get the blank cells. I really like the way they've done it. So let's create the formula again. This time for the chocolate revenue, we'll be using the chocolate quantity multiplied by the chocolate price. So what do we start with? Always start with the equal sign. We're going to click on the quantity of chocolate for week 1. We're going to multiply that by I5, but we want to make that an absolute reference. Now I'm going to tell you a really handy shortcut if you're dealing with relative references. Frankly, it's a real pain to have to go in here and type in the dollar sign. So Microsoft has given us a shortcut, which is the F4 key. When I tap F4, it's one of the function keys that's above the keyboard on every modern keyboard. It automatically toggles that reference between absolute and relative references. And actually I can hit it 4 times before it goes back to the original. So there's I5. I tap it once, it adds dollar signs in front of both the I and the 5. I tap it again, it adds a dollar sign in front of the 5. I tap it a 3rd time, it adds a dollar sign in front of the I. And I tap it a 4th time and it takes the dollar signs away. All you need to know is you type it in or you click on the cell that you want, and then to make it into an absolute reference, you tap F4 just once and it will transform it to an absolute reference. Then you hit enter. Then you can autofill that formula and you can see if we double click on one, we're multiplying the chocolate quantity for week 5 times the price of chocolate. So those numbers should be good. Okay, now we're going to fill in some values on our dashboard here. We have the prices of chocolate and vanilla, and then we have the totals for this time period. And of course, we're projecting into the future because the week 12 start date was just 3 days ago. So, well, we won't worry about that. Maybe I should have used last year. Okay, anyway, so for the quantity sold, we want the total quantity sold for this time period, for this quarter, let's say. So here's a case where we can use the sum formula, the sum function rather, But we're going to have to tell it where the data is because it's not adjacent to where our formula is going. I'm going to go back to the Home tab. And I never mentioned, but the Autosum button on the Home tab is in the editing group here on the far right. There's also the there's a sort and filter is in the same group for some reason. But I guess that's editing our spreadsheet. Anyway, so we've got the quantity of vanilla for a time period. I'm gonna click Autosum, and it's guessing I4 because that's an adjacent cell with the number in it. But we're gonna say, no, Excel, you're wrong this time. We want the quantity of vanilla, so that's in column C. I'm just gonna click and drag to select that range, and it adds it. I'm gonna hit enter, and there's our sum of the quantity of vanilla sold. And we can do the same for chocolate. I'm going to click Autosum, select the chocolate quantity, which is in column E, and hit enter. And I think the function worked correctly, but you may notice that the format is not correct. It's showing an accounting format instead of just a number, because this is not, the quantity sold is not currency or accounting. It's not money. It's simply a number sold. So we need to change that in the number group on the Home tab here. We can just use the drop down, and I'm just going to use general, and that usually works. If I select number, you'll notice it automatically adds decimal places, which is easily fixed, but if I just pick general, it just it's a quicker fix. Now we just want the totals for all of the ice cream cones or servings that we sold. We can just use the Autosum this time. Well, isn't that funny? It's guessing the wrong place. It went to the left. I'm not sure why, but we just correct it, select the cells that we want to add, and hit enter. And you can see that's in bold, which is nice for looking at it at a glance. Now we have the revenue field for the vanilla, and the revenue is price times quantity. It's given us the formula there, and there's actually two ways that we could do this. As usual with Microsoft Office and Excel, there's more than one way to do stuff. And so we'll use the price times quantity the first time, but I'll show you an option in this case in the second option. So what do we start with? We always start with equals. Now I'm going to say that multiply the price times the quantity. So I just clicked on the price, typed in the multiplier asterisk symbol, and then clicked on the quantity, and I hit enter. And because it's multiplying currency, the result is in currency as well. So the option for the revenue for chocolate is to add up all of these over here. So we can just demonstrate that again. So we can use a simple formula like we did in the vanilla revenue, or we could do the Autosum again and just add up the revenue that we have over here. Either way should give the correct result. Now, for the revenue total, we can use Autosum again. But for some reason, it's guessing only one number above and not both of them. So I have to correct that. You have to watch carefully what assumptions Excel makes when you're creating your spreadsheets and formulas and functions. So when you hit enter, there's our total. I'm gonna scroll over a little bit to see the rest of our dashboard now that we're pretty much done with our log of weekly sales. So I'm going to introduce another kind of formula or function rather. And this is an if-then function. So let me see. To make sure I don't miss something. So an if statement is a logical function. There's a whole class of logical functions in Excel. And an if function is the most basic kind. And so I want to know whether or not my revenues met our revenue goals for vanilla and chocolate and for the total. So I have the values here to the left of this cell. I've got my actual revenue for vanilla and chocolate in column K. And then I have the revenue goals that I wanted to try to meet in this quarter. And so the if function, basically I wanted to say, if I met the goal, to say yes, and if I didn't meet the goal, to say no. And that's what a if statement can do. A simple logical function. So I'm going to demonstrate how we can look up a function. If you're not sure of the exact syntax or the structure of the inside the parentheses, you can use the drop-down menu from the Autosum thing on the Home tab and go to More Functions. And if is a common function, it shows up in the list here. But if it didn't, we could type in if up here and click Go, and then it's going to show all the different things that if comes up in. And there it is selected, and then it shows down here the syntax for the function right here. And there's 3 inputs or arguments, and the description says checks whether a condition is met and returns one value if true and another value if false. And those are the 3 arguments or inputs. We start with the logical test, and then there's a comma. Then we have the value if it's true, and then a comma, and then a value if it's false. Okay,
there's a question in this chat.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Let's see, I apologize if I missed this. I'm getting ahead of you. But if you add in a new week's worth of data to row 16, will the formulas automatically update the dashboard numbers? Okay, that's a good question. let me finish this if section and I'll come back to that. Thank you. So we've got 3 values, and then I'm gonna click OK. And then here's the nice part about Excel, that the dialog box will walk us through entering the values in the parentheses here. So notice it's added the function, and you can see it up here in the formula bar. It says equals if with open and close parentheses. And all we need to do is enter the arguments or inputs inside the parentheses, because every function has this same structure. That part is a given. But how to build the function inside the parentheses is exactly what Excel will help us through. So the logical test in this case, we want to know, is the revenue, the actual revenue, greater than the revenue goal? So the logical test, I'm going to click in the logical test box here, and I'm going to click in the vanilla revenue, the actual revenue. Then I'm going to use the greater than symbol, which is the one that points to the right. That's the way I always remembered it. And then I'm going to click the revenue goal. So my formula reads K4 greater than L4. That is, my actual revenue is greater than the goal. That's my logical test. The value, if true, if my revenue is greater than the goal, then I want it to say yes. So I'm going to type yes there. But let's see, I need to put that in parentheses, because Excel doesn't understand in the context of a formula or a function, any text always has to be in parentheses, because it only understands numbers and operators in the logical or mathematical context. So it understands the greater than, and it understands numbers and cell references, but words have to be in quotes. So the value of true is going to be quote yes. The value of false is quote no. I'm going to click OK. And what's the result? Was the goal met? Yes, the goal was met. The goal was 12,000. The revenue was 12,652.50. And so look up here, you can see the full function, the if statement. We have if parentheses K4 is greater than L4, comma, quote yes, comma, quote no, close parentheses. That's our if statement. So let's do it again. So let me demonstrate. We can also, the more functions button is the same as the not insert, we want formulas. There's an insert function button, and you notice it has this symbol. It says FX in lowercase, and it has the same thing here, insert function. That's the same button. Right in front of the formula bar, there's the insert function button. So if I click that, it brings up that same insert function dialog as when we clicked more functions on the sum function drop-down menu. So I'm going to click OK. We're on if. And again, I can do my logical test. I'm going to say L5 by clicking on it. And then I have to use the shift for the greater than button, K5. So, oh, wait a second. I think I got it backwards. I want to know if revenue was greater than the goal. So yeah, I got it backwards. Let's back up and start again. So I want to say if my revenue was greater than my revenue goal, that's what I want. And then the value of true, again, is yes, quote. Now I hit enter before I finished. So my formula isn't quite done. So I'm going to go back up to the formula bar to edit it. And I have two arguments. Notice it actually worked, but if the goal wasn't met, then it'll probably just be blank because the third argument is missing. So it's just going to be blank. It wouldn't say no, but I want to add that. So I'm just going to go up here to edit my formula and click right after the yes, type in a comma, quote, no. Doesn't have to be capitalized, that's fine. And I hit enter. Now, format is slightly different. It's kind of weird. One was capitals, one wasn't. No big deal. Okay, so now let's go back and play with our numbers again. And I will answer the question, but first I want to say, let's pretend that we ran out of chocolate in the last week, and we had 10 orders. No, that's not going to do it. That's not. Let's say we ran out completely, so it was 0. Now I don't know if you noticed, but as soon as I changed this number to 0, the goal here, the answer of whether the goal was met, changed to no. Because notice the revenue for chocolate dipped below 12,000. So it was no longer greater than the goal. So that my if statement that said then returned a no, because the revenue for chocolate was not greater than the goal. So the question earlier was, if we add a new week's worth of data to row 16, will the formulas automatically update the dashboard numbers? Well, let's try it. We'll type in 13. Actually, let's see, let's autofill. We'll autofill that. Oh, it did a copy instead of fill. So I'm going to click select, use this. So this little thing that pops up after I autofill lets me choose other options, and I can say fill series and see if this one will do it. That one did it. So let's make up some numbers. Let's say we had a slow week. We had snow. Nobody wanted snow, wanted it. Notice it automatically filled in the vanilla revenue for that value. Let's see if it does the same thing with chocolate. I'm going to say 120. Let's say 60. It was just that slow week. And again, it automatically filled in the correct value. It continued the formula. It just in D16, it didn't copy the format. So I'm going to just do an autofill, and that changed the that copied the format of the previous one. So did you notice whether or not these numbers updated? Notice if I double click on the vanilla quantity sold, this range does not extend to that extra one. So the answer to your question is that if you add a new week's worth of data, it does not automatically update in the dashboard. And the same is true for this one. So the way to fix, we have to edit this formula, in other words, and luckily it's pretty easy. I can just drag this. So notice when I double click on the formula, we have this visual representation. You notice the corners are squares, and when I mouse over those corners, I get arrows, resized arrows. It's pretty tricky to get right on it though. Notice this is the wrong cursor. That's the move cursor. That would move the whole range to some other cells. So that's not the right one. And that's the right one. And that's not the right one because that's the selection cursor. So again, as I move the mouse near that corner, okay, that's the selection cursor. There's the move cursor. And I move to the square. There's the resize. So then I can drag that down and then hit enter. Well, that's definitely going to meet my revenue goals. But as you see, we had to edit our formula to include that bottom row. Okay, we've got 15 minutes left. And I want to demonstrate one more function. Actually, two more. And that is for the first one is there's a function for today's date. And then the other function we want to say, so if this is an injury report, there's a spot for today's date. There's a date for the last reported injury. And then we have a number and then a spot for the days without injury. And then we have a grade based on the days without injury. So, and a spoiler alert, the grade is just going to be a simple if statement. So there are more complicated formulas, functions for like a letter grade. If you were scoring tests in a class like A, B, C, D, F, there's actually uses what's called a nested if function to create a complicated sort of system that would take a number grade on a test, for instance, and return a letter. So, you know, A, B, C, D, F. But we're just going to stick with this a simple if function there. So for today's date, this is the simplest function that you'll come across. And let's use the insert function. We can actually use this insert function command here. And I happen to know that the name of the function is today. So I'm going to type in today and click go. And there is today. And here's the syntax for today. It says today, open parentheses, close parentheses, returns the current date formatted as a date. So I could just click OK and it's going to enter it, but I'm going to actually type it in just for fun. So I'm just going to type, oops, I see what happens when you type. You always do typos. I do anyway. So today, and I can actually click on this where it says today there, but I'm going to type it in because I'm a masochist. No, just to demonstrate. So I just said open parentheses, close parentheses, hit enter. And what does it do? There is today's date. The cool thing about this is whenever you open this spreadsheet, it's going to fill in today's date, whatever the date is. And the way that it works is it pulls the date from the computer you're on. So if your date and time are not current on the computer, then that's going to be incorrect. But it will be as current as the computer you're using. Now, if the days are integers, then the days without injury is just going to be a simple math, subtracting one from the other. So which number is going to be bigger? Well, each day adds a number to the number that Excel uses to represent the days. So the current date is going to be the bigger number. So I'm just going to take today's date and subtract the last reported injury date, and that should give us the days without injury. So this is nice basic formula. We're going to say, what do we start with? Always equals. And I'm going to click today's date, type a minus, click the last reported injury, hit enter. 35 days since the last injury. The last reported injury was February 15th. So is that a good grade or a bad grade? Well, the formula that was suggested for this, of course we could do whatever we want. So we're going to do an if-then function or an if statement function to say whether or not the days without injury was greater than 60 days. And if so, then we'll say great job. And if not, then we'll say not good. So you can guess what the answer will be, but let's type out our formula. This time I'll just type it for practice. Type equals, type in if. Incidentally, I meant to do, you can type in lowercase. Traditionally they're in uppercase, but they still work in lowercase. And I'm gonna, and I'll just demonstrate that by typing in lowercase. Once you have the equal sign, it understands that this is a function, and you have the name of the function correct, and then the parentheses and everything, all the syntax correct, then it's gonna understand it. And you see it's already put in our syntax clue hint below here. The logical test is if P6 is greater than 60, days without injury greater than 60, that's our logical test. If so, I'll hit a comma and type in quotes, great job, and put in an exclamation mark. Close quote, comma. If not, we'll say not good, period. Close quote, close parenthesis. Okay. And I hit enter. So it's been, it was not more than 60 days since our last injury, so that's not good. Of course, you could do less than 30 days if you're feeling more generous. But it's an ice cream store. What do you want? Anyway, are there any other questions about what we did? I didn't fill in the goal met for the total. But that's okay. I want to shift back to our PowerPoint and go over a couple of things here. This is these are some common functions. Again, there's the function basic structure of the function, equal sign, the name of the function, parentheses, plus your inputs. And the syntax of the inputs can be given to you through the insert function dialog box. And also Excel's help function is a great can be a great help too. Again, we can go to insert function, and then there's a help on this function. You can also simply hit F1 on the keyboard, and that's the help shortcut. And there's some top help topics here listed. See, is there a link to be able to view these classes again? Yes, there will be. It's not, there needs to be some editing of the video, and it will be posted on YouTube. And I will post the class materials link again. And Ken, if you could post the evaluation link now too, that would be great. So here's the link to the class materials if you came late. Oh, and Ken has posted the link to the evaluation. So in this search function, if I just type if, it comes up if function, and there's I can click on the if function, and there's a video. So, and a bunch of examples that I can read through, and I can expand this window to get a better view. So that's really handy, the help function. The now function just returns the current date and time. And again, the parentheses are empty but required because all functions have that structure. There's the count function. Here's the if function with the syntax, the logical test, value if true, value if false. Those are the three arguments. There's also a sum if, which also has three arguments, and that takes if there's a table full of different values, it will say, if this value is that, then add up this other matching column. And we'll be looking at that in the more formulas and functions class in 2 weeks. If you're interested in doing more. And then here's some of the shortcuts that I mentioned. There's one that I didn't mention. So we have the Control Z is your undo. Control Y is a redo, but it also is to repeat an action. So that can be handy. It sort of works like the paste or the format painter. You can use Control Y to repeat a formatting command if you're going down and formatting specific cells for some reason. F1 is help. F4 is that toggle between absolute and relative values. And then there's a control plus the accent grave, or that little, it's like a little accent mark. And it's in the top left corner of the keyboard above the tab button. Let me show you what that looks like. If I do control tab, it expands every cell with a function and shows that function in that cell. Notice it makes the all the columns really wide to fit everything. But this shows our spreadsheet that we did with all of the functions displayed in the cell where it is. And that's, again, control accent mark. It just toggles it on or off. And then there's some links to some materials we have in the library, a couple of books and a series of videos from Excel 2016. There's a ton of things on YouTube as well, tutorials on Excel. GCF Learn Free is an excellent site. I recommend the lessons corresponding to today's class are lessons 13 to 16. The PDF of this PowerPoint is in that class materials link. Also, if you want a free alternative to Excel, LibreOffice has a decent program. It's called Calc. Their spreadsheet program is called Calc. It has the same functionality, but of course the interface is going to be different. And here are the last two classes in the series here. The fifth class was kind of an afterthought, so we put it at the end instead of directly following this class, but it kind of expands, looks at another example for some of the same concepts. So that I think can be really useful, but as well as maybe looking at, we might look at VLOOKUP as well, which is a very commonly used business function in the business world. But next week is going to be graphs and pivot tables. And there's a link here to get signed up for that if you're not already. Please get on the wait list, and I always let everybody in, and not everybody shows up, so there's always room, even though in Excel, in Zoom, it doesn't really make much difference. Lastly, you can give us a call, ask for me, if you want to get some one-on-one help with Excel, if you have a specific problem or topic you want to learn more about. You can do that. And thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you next week. I'm going to send out the links to the recorded classes when they're done. If you go to YouTube, actually, if you just Google Wichita Public Library YouTube, our channel pops up, and you'll see videos of many of our programs here, and you see the most recent two are Excel 1 and Excel 2 from the last 2 weeks. So those are already up, and it usually takes about a week or so for our team to do some little simple edits and get these posted. So I think maybe when the series is done, I'm going to send out a link to our site. You can also just search this page for Excel and other series of Excel. So this was from last fall. There were a couple of the classes then also show up here. So previous instances of this class have already also been posted on there. So that's all for today, and thanks for attending. We'll see you next time.